Ian Lees-Galloway.
Well, Mr Chairman, I welcome the challenge from David Seymour to the Labour Party to reach across the House and try and find a concord on the Resource Management Act. Because he's too late, we've already done it. Labour has repeatedly told the National Party and the other parties in government we'd be more than happy to work with them on the Resource Management Act, but the National Party keeps saying no. It's our way or the highway. No, Labour, we're not prepared to work with you. So thank you, David Seymour, for reiterating the challenge to the Labour Party, because we are more than welcome. I want to hear the same challenge made to the National Party, encouraging them to reach across the House and work in a bipartisan manner with parties of the opposition so that we can actually deal with some of the real issues in the Resource Management Act, some of which do indeed relate to housing. We would welcome that. We would love to have that. So good on David Seymour for laying down the challenge. At least he does something useful when he actually shows up in the House. Mr Chairman, I want to talk about what's really happening on the ground for people with housing. Because, there's a lot of rhetoric being spouted in here. The government tries to tell us what various plans and initiatives they've got. But I want to talk about the real experience of people in my electorate in Palmerston North. Because the real experience in Palmerston North is that where there used to be state houses, there are now acres and acres of empty land. And some of that land has remained empty for years. But finally, after 7 years in some cases, the government does have a plan for that land. The plan is sell it off. Now that would be fine if the plan was to use the money from the sales of those houses to build more houses in Palmerston North. But that's not the plan at all. The government has been quite clear about this, that they are reducing the number of state houses, they are reducing the provision of social housing in Palmerston North, just like they're doing in regions right across the country. So that's the fact. That is what is actually happening. If you cut through the rhetoric, if you cut through all the noise, you just have to look around you in your own communities, especially those of us who live in the regions, to see that actually what National's plan is to reduce the provision of state and social housing. And they argue that there's actually no need for it. Well, if they genuinely believe there's no need to it, I have a recommendation for them. Go along to your local Salvation Army. Go along to your local Women's Refuge. Go along and talk to any number of the organisations that represent people with disabilities and ask them if there is a need for social housing, because the answer is resoundingly, oh yes. Yes, we are desperately short of housing for people who are the most vulnerable, the people who are in need. And what's happening as a result is Work and Income are now telling people, because they can't get onto the waiting list for a state house, to go and see the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army who have had to get rid of their women's hostel in Palmerston North because of a lack of funding, because they lost contracts with the government, whose men's hostel is now under extreme pressure and has been taking people that it's probably not fit to take, which has been raising the ire of the people who live around that men's hostel, because they do not get the appropriate funding from the government to house those people adequately. The Women's Refuge, who have had to close one of their facilities because they have lost funding from the government, who are now having people referred to them by WINS. Any woman with children who goes to Work and Income and tries to get on the Housing New Zealand list and is denied is told to go to Women's Refuge, whether or not they actually qualify for the services that Women's Refuge provide. Women's Refuge is there to provide support for women who are trying to escape domestic violence. So now Women's Refuge is having to waste their own resources screening women to determine whether or not they actually fit Women's Refuge's criteria, because Work and Income can't do their job properly and actually ensure that those people who are in need are able to get supportive accommodation, sir. So that's the real thing. Whatever the government tells us, Whatever spin and lines they have for us, those are the facts. That's what's really happening in our region, sir.